Hey, what is up you guys? My name is Catherine and welcome to my channel. I'm like insanely excited for today's video, so I really hope that you guys like it. It is going to be a long one, so just buckle up, grab some popcorn, grab a drink, do your thing. On Friday, November 2nd, James Charles finally revealed his collaboration with Morphe that he's been teasing for like ever, which included the colorful palette that he's been hinting at, and it is called the Unleash Your Inner Artist palette. So it's modeled after the Morphe 39A palette, which was their holiday palette from last year. So it has 39 shades and it's sort of split up, so top half of the palette is meant for your everyday sort of glam looks, and the bottom half of your palette is meant for rainbow, bold, bright looks. It's meant to have just like everything you need in an eyeshadow palette like ever. So this one's gonna retail for $39, which I was like taken aback when I saw that price tag, especially because the original 39A is actually only $34. As always, there are Morphe discount codes that you can use. I recommend using the code ADOPTLOVE for 10% off because that 10% will go to help animal shelters. So this palette is coming out on November 13th, and I just feel like this is going to be the hyped up palette of the season. It is so unique. Like, I'm honestly so fond of the concept. I think it's such a beautiful palette, but I know a lot of people have their hang-ups with Morphe, with their marketing tactics, and especially after the Jaclyn Hill Vault fiasco, a lot of people just don't want to purchase from Morphe, or maybe you're just on a no buy but you're very drawn to the colors in this palette. So I am going to be going through my makeup collection and duping every single shade in the Unleash Your Inner Artist palette, all 39 shades. And then at the end, I will also be doing a tutorial using the dupes that I found. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I'll be doing a tutorial using the shades that I picked out that's based off of the Unleash Your Inner Artist palette. So my guess is that some people are only going to be interested in the dupes for the rainbow portion of the palette, and some people might only be interested in the tutorial, which is the look that I have on my eyes right now, by the way. So I'm just going to leave some timestamps for both of those over here on the screen. That way, if that is what you're interested in, you can just go ahead and skip to that, since this is going to be a pretty long video. Before we do get started, definitely don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I am here every Wednesday and Sunday, and I'd love to have you here to hang out with me. And definitely don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me out as a creator and makes it easier for other people to find this video as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, welcome to the swatching portion of this video. A couple things before we get started. I have to admit, James created a very unique palette. There were some shades in here where I just really struggled to find a dupe or a shade alternative to them, so shout out to him for that. And then I also just feel the need to point out that I haven't seen this palette in person. It's not been released yet. I'm only basing these dupes and shade alternatives off of the video that James posted revealing the palette, and then the pictures and videos that have been posted on Trend Mood and Morphe. So there are many things like white balance, lighting, even just the fact that James and I have different skin tones that might not make these exact shade matches. I do feel the need to point that out as well. The chances of you having the exact same eyeshadow palette collection as I do are like slim to none, and obviously it'd be much more expensive to just buy all of these palettes than it would be to just buy the Unleash Your Inner Artist palette. I am just more doing this because I figured that there are probably a lot of people who are only drawn to a certain portion of the palette, maybe even just 4 shades or even just 1 or 2 shades, and then if they already own some of the palettes that I'm mentioning, they might realize that like, oh, I already have color alternatives to those colors. And then I do also encourage you, if you have any dupes in your collection that you think are good dupes for these shades, that you share those down below as well. Expanding the knowledge is always a great thing. So I'm just gonna go in the same order that James went in his video. So the first shade is Canvas, which is just a matte light bone shade color. I have countless ones of these in my collection, and I'm sure you do as well, but a couple of my favorites are the shade Rowdy from the ColourPop I Think I Love You palette, which probably won't even really show up on my skin, and then the shade Tempura from the Anastasia Beverly Hills Modern Renaissance palette. I like barely have any product left in here. That's how much I love this shade. I like don't even really feel a need to include this shade in the video. I just didn't want to skip over any. I just realized I'm left-handed and I should be doing these swatches with my left hand. I re-swatched the two matte bone shades on my wrist, even though you can't really see them. So the next shade is Ring Light, and that is described as a metallic bright gold that is almost a metallic white, and this is one of those shades where I really struggled to find an exact dupe for it. The two that I found in my collection that were closest are the shade Trixie from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette, and this lightest gold shade in the Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette. These are all very light shades, so they're not really showing up too well. Hopefully you can see those. Next is the shade So Good. So this is a true gold shade, not too yellow, not too bronze. And the first shade that came to my mind was the shade Half Baked from the original Naked 2 palette, and then this is also in the Naked 1 palette. This is like the most beautiful gold shade ever in my opinion. And then another one that is pretty close to that is the shade Bitter Better from the ColourPop I Think I Love You palette. So that is those shades, and I will be zooming in on my arm at the end of each row. The next shade is 518, which is a bright orange shade. So the first shade that I came up with is the shade Big Cocktails from the ColourPop Yes Please palette. This is an amazing warm-toned colorful palette. And then from the NYX Ultimate Brights palette, which you will be seeing a lot of in this video, this top right orange shade. And again from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette, the shade Hippie. The next shade is the shade Rusted, which was described as being a brighter orange shade, and it looked like a neon salmon color to me, and that's why I'm like questioning the lighting and if I'm even really basing my dupes off of accurate colors. But the colors that I found are the second from the top right in the NYX Ultimate Brights palette. This is definitely a very neon, almost salmony pink color. And this shade Dreamsicle from the Pinky Rose Cosmetics Bright Lights palette. This is really hard. I don't know how he does this. Next shade is Halloween, which was described as a metallic bright orange, and again just looked a little bit more reddish to me. So the two shades that I found are the shade Winning Ticket from the ColourPop You Had Me at Hello palette. And then from the Carly Bybel Deluxe palette, this second from the right on the top shade, one of my favorite shades in the whole palette. It's such a beautiful, beautiful shade. That is those. So next is Wig, a brownie gold, almost bronze shade. So again, from the ColourPop You Had Me at Hello palette, the shade Pulling Strings, and the shade Level Up from the ColourPop You Had Me at Hello palette. Last color in this row is the shade Tea, which is a cool toned brown, and I couldn't tell if this was a satin or a matte shade, and James did not say, so I have a couple of each in here. First off is Cypress Umber from the Modern Renaissance palette. We have the shade Howdy from the ColourPop You Had Me at Hello palette. This bottom right shade from the Carly Bybel Deluxe palette. And from Sister Morphe herself, this shade Mojo from the Jaclyn Hill Dark Magic palette. So my space is not conducive to showing these swatches on video. This is the first row. I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of it and pop it up on screen next to a screenshot of James's original swatches. That way you can compare, see for yourself, be the judge. And then we are going to move on to the next row. Alright, so I have a good and fresh sister arm here. Shout out to my NYX Micellar Water, and it is time to move on to the second row. So the first shade in row 2 is the shade Punch Me, which is a cool toned brown shade, allegedly, that looks more like a warm toned brown shade to me. And the first shade that I came up with is the shade Innocent from the Tarte Pro palette. This palette is great if you just want like a ton of staple mattes in your collection. Really, really great. The next shade I came up with is the shade Shining Star from the ColourPop and Kathleen Light's Dream Street palette. And then I have the shade Bel Air from the ColourPop I Think I Love You palette, which is an actual cool toned brown, just in case it really is cool tone and it was just the lighting. So those are those three. Next is the shade Sister, which is a peachy pinky champagne-y metallic color. This type of color is like my favorite color ever. I know it's basic, but I just love it. So the first one is the shade My Treat from the ColourPop I Think I Love You palette. Again, you can just tell I've used the absolute shit out of that shade. And the shade The Knot from the ColourPop You Had Me at Hello palette. These shades are very, very similar. The shade Vermeer from the Modern Renaissance, which I also like can't get product out of. And again from the Carly Bybel Deluxe palette, this shade all the way on the left in the middle row. So that is those. Next is the shade Mary, which was described as a cool toned mauve shade, and it wasn't. So the shade that I found that looks close to that shade is the shade Soft Core from the ColourPop Ooh La La palette. It's this cute like muted pinky taupe, I would say. Next, for the shade Literally, which is a bright pinky peach metallic, I have this middle shade in the Makeup Revolution Iconic Neutrals 2 palette that is only $7. And from my Bad Habit Beauty Athena palette, I have this shade Medusa, coincidentally also in the center of the palette. That's those. Next is the shade You're Kidding, which James was going on and on about how this is a true red, which just doesn't exist on the market. And I was sitting there like, yeah, okay, James, sure. And then I went through my palette and I was like, you're right. All of these are either too like magenta or too orange or not pigmented. The only one that I found that was a true red was this red in my NYX Ultimate Brights palette, but it really isn't super pigmented at all, and it does still pull just a little bit magenta, so James was right. I have heard that the shade Love Plus from Sugar Pill is a true red, but I don't own it and I don't remember ever seeing it in person, although I'm sure I have, so I can't really vouch for that. This packaging has seen better days. Next is the shade Shook, which is a metallic cranberry red. So again, from the Bad Habit Athena palette, I have this shade Prize. Very, very beautiful shade. And then also from the Revolution Neutrals 2 palette, right at the bottom, there is this very shimmery red shade as well. Those are very pretty shades. Next is the shade Boutique, which is a deep matte red maroon color. So the best shade that I found was this shade Maud from the Tarte Pro palette. This is like one of my favorite shades in the palette as well. And surprisingly enough, I didn't really find any other shades that looked similar to the shade that was on the screen. The next color is Benny, which James named after his dog and I think is just the cutest thing in the world. And it is a deep deep eggplanty color. So the first shade that I have, again from the Tarte Pro palette, is this shade Vamp. And lastly, from the Revolution Division palette, which is a dupe of the Subculture palette, this shade down here is also a deep eggplanty color. And if you're over here like, Kath, I've literally never seen you use that on your channel. I just got it. So you haven't. So this is row 2. Again, I will go ahead and pop a picture up on the screen so that you can get a good idea of what this looks like next to James's palette. Now it's time for the boring row. So this is the row of shades that James thought people would use the most. So they're pretty like neutral, like transition, basic shades. The first shade in this row is the shade Flashback, of course. So it is just your true matte white. The first shade that I came up with is Vintage from the Tarte Pro palette. So that's one swipe of Vintage. And the second shade is the shade Butterscotch from the My Little Pony palette. So this one does have a bit of a pinky lavender undertone to it versus just being a pure white, but if you have this palette, it can definitely serve as just a pure white for you. The next shade is the shade Face. So he said this is a champagne-y gold highlighting color, and he really didn't elaborate beyond that, but it sounded like it was actually meant to be used as a face highlighter. So I picked out 2 of my champagne gold face highlighters. The first one is Flexitarian from ColourPop. This is like my all-time holy grail highlighter. It's so beautiful. And then from Wet n Wild, their Gothographic highlighter in Moon Tears. So this one has been discontinued, but they just released a bunch of loose highlighters, so you might be able to find one like this. So that's those. This, wow. I'm obsessed with loose highlighters, honestly. Next is the shade Tune, which James described as an orangey transition shade, but it looked more like a mustardy shade to me. So the first shade that I picked out was the shade Brulee from the Pinky Rose Bright Lights palette. And then I also picked out this mustardy shade from the Division palette. Next is the shade Code James, which he just said orange. So first shade I picked out was this orange from the Makeup Revolution Neutrals 2 palette. It's a very true orange shade. From the ColourPop You Had Me at Hello palette, this shade Girls Night Out. Next is the shade 10% Off, which is more of a burnt orange. So first shade is Whimsy from the Tarte Pro. The next shade is Real Gar from the Modern Renaissance palette. And then from the Weekend Festival palette, this shade Escape. Then there is the shade No Beans, which is a deep warm-toned brown. So the first shade is the shade My Type from the ColourPop I Think I Love You palette. And then from the Revolution Neutrals 2, this middle bottom shade. And then the last shade is Spooky, which is a matte black shade. So I have quite a few of those. I have the shade Let's Do It from the I Think I Love You palette. I have Temptress from the Dark Magic palette. I have Blackout from the Naked 2 palette. And from the Tarte Pro, I have this shade Punk. So out of all the rows in this palette, this is probably the row where you have most, if not all of the shades already, but nonetheless, these are the alternatives that I came up with. If you skipped ahead to find out the dupes of the rainbow shades in the palette, you are in the right place. I am now doing the first row of the rainbow shades of the palette, or the fourth row in the palette in general. So the first shade is B, which is a matte, very, very bright yellow. So first shade I came up with is the shade Mischief from the ColourPop Yes Please palette. The next shade is this shade Electronica from the Bad Habit Beauty Aftershock palette. And the last bright yellow is from my NYX Ultimate Brights palette. Next shade is the shade Guac, a metallic green with gold glitter. So the first shade is Bless Her Heart from the Too Faced Cosmetics Sweet Peach palette. Next is this metallic-y green shade from the Wet n Wild Comfort Zone. And this one's probably the closest to the actual shade in the Morphe palette. And then from the Division palette again, this lime green shade, which I believe is a dupe for, I believe it's either Edge or Cube. I don't know the shade names of Subculture. This one's not very close, but it still has that green gold shift to it. The next shade is Hello, which is one of my favorite shades, and it is a metallic bright teal. So first up I have the My Little Pony palette, and I feel like both of these shades are quite similar. So we have Firefly and Snuzzle here. Like you can see they swatch very similarly on the arm as well. From the Pinky Rose Cosmetics Bright Lights palette, the shade Glitz. And from Sugar Pill, the shade Candy Crush. Like, isn't that just like minty teal metallic? Such a beautiful color. I'm obsessed. Next shade is a matte bright teal, the matte sister of that last shade. So the first shade I have is the shade Palooza from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette. From the Pinky Rose Bright Lights palette, the shade Cloud, which isn't really quite as teal, it's more of a sky blue, but it's still quite close. And from the NYX Ultimate Brights palette, this lightest teal shade. Next shade is Brother, which is a true blue shade. So again, from the NYX Ultimate Brights, I would definitely call this a true blue shade, and I am very much running out of arm space here. And from the Laura Lee Los Angeles Party Animal palette, the shade Damage Control. I'm probably going to be getting rid of this based off of recent events, but I know a lot of people got this in a BoxyCharm, so I did want to mention this anyways. Next shade is the shade Artistry, which is a very unique shade. He said it's sort of like a pressed glitter purple shade. So I tried to find as many like similar as possible because obviously I couldn't like feel it to really know what the texture was. So the first thing I came up with was this, oh my god, that just fell apart when I touched it. Cute. This ColourPop Super Shock Shadow in Sunbeam. From the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette, this shade Wicked. From the Anastasia Norvina palette, the shade Celestial. And from my Pop Beauty Blink Brilliance palette, this pressed glitter purple shade. Next shade is Love That, which is a matte magenta shade. So I have 4 for this one as well. Will we make it? Probably not. So first one is Tingle from the Bad Habit Beauty Aftershock palette. Next one is Dippy from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette. Sandbar from the ColourPop Ooh La La palette. And the shade Becky from the Pinky Rose Bright Lights palette. This next shade, I quite honestly couldn't find anything that came super close. It's the shade Pinkity Drinkity. It's a very light pale baby pink. The closest that I found in my collection is the shade Georgia from my Sweet Peach palette, but it just doesn't have that quite same baby pink effect, but that is the closest one that I found. So that is Colorful Rainbow Row 1. You can see I found quite a few colorful shades for you guys. Alright, we have almost made it. We're on the last row of the palette, which is the second row of rainbow colors. So the first color is Social Blade, which is a bright neon green. So I have this bright neon green from the NYX Ultimate Brights palette. Shows up super well, as you can see. And from the Bright Lights palette, this shade Smash. Honestly, let's just pretend I didn't even mention the NYX palette, like this is the shade. NYX is cancelled. Sorry, NYX. Next is the shade Daddy, which, first of all, I watched the whole video, obviously, to like take notes for this video. Ian's face when James said Daddy was hilarious. Like, I love their sibling relationship. I think it's so cute. But anyways, the only shade that I have is my Coastal Scent Single in Pinehurst. This is a gorgeous deep green shade though. So there's that. Next shade is the shade Cape Cod, and I love that he named a shade Cape Cod because I remember going there when I was super little. So that is a metallic aqua shade. The first shade I came up with is the shade Ultimate from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette. The next shade is the shade Drop from the Bad Habit Beauty Aftershock palette. And then the last one is this aqua color from the Wet n Wild Hasta La Costa Quad. Alright, so my camera stopped recording because my card was full. I don't know where it cut out, so refresher. Dupes for Cape Cod are Ultimate from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette, Drop from the Bad Habit Beauty Aftershock palette, and this aqua shade from the Wet n Wild Hasta La Costa Quad. Next shade is Cola, which is a matte deep blue. So I chose Karaoke again from the Laura Lee Los Angeles Party Animal palette. I truly think this is a beautiful shade. Like, why did Laura have to turn out to be so problematic? Like, this is such a beautiful shade. The next shade is Acapella, a deep metallic blue. So I have this shade Trance from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette. The next shade is Escape. It's a deep purple plum, and y'all know I love my purples, so I have a few here, just a few. First off, I have my Anastasia Beverly Hills Single in Violet. This one is a little less saturated than the shade looked on camera. I have this Deepest Purple from the NYX Ultimate Brights palette. This is the first purple eyeshadow that ever made its way into your girl Kath's hands. The shade Katie from the ColourPop Ooh La La palette. And again from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette, the shade Swag. The next shade is the shade Single, which is like a bright magenta looking purple. So there's this like magenta shade in the NYX Ultimate Brights palette. And then in the Pinky Rose Cosmetics Bright Lights palette, we have the shade Pop Rocks, which I'm obsessed with. We're down to our last shade, guys. Wow. This shade is called, we are down to our last shade, and that is the shade Skip, which is a bright neon pink. So I have for you Sensation from the Aftershock palette. And one last time from Party Animal, the shade Bottoms Up. So that is the last row of the Unleash Your Inner Artist palette, the second rainbow row in the palette. I hope that you guys did enjoy this duping portion of the video. I hope that it was somewhat helpful. Maybe if you were eyeing only a certain little section or just a couple shades in the palette, you might have realized you already have those shades in your collection, or you found a palette you like better that has those shades in them. So definitely make sure to recommend your dupes down below as well. I'm sure everyone would love to hear them, but without further ado, because I'm sure this video is going to be like 40 minutes long at least, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the tutorial. So if you want to figure out how to get this eye look and what dupe shades I used to get it, then just keep on watching. Alright, so I have primed my eyelid with the Milani eyeshadow primer. Haven't set it, but it feels pretty tacky. So I'm going to be starting out with the dupe I found for the shade Pinkity Drinkity. I really didn't think I'd ever say that phrase in my life, but here we are. So that is Georgia from the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. Going into that on a BH Cosmetics number 11. And I'm tapping this around the crease and outer corner. This is just a transition shade. Now I'm going into my dupe for the shade Single, that bright purple shade, and that is Pop Rocks from my Pinky Rose Cosmetics Bright Lights palette. So I'm going into this on Away Studio E127, very round, fluffy, just a little bit of a taper to it. So I'm starting this in the outer corner and then bringing it up into the crease, pretty far over, stopping like just shy of my inner corner. And then I am sort of bringing this out in a winged shape. Now I'm going into that dupe for Escape, which is this deep purple from my NYX Ultimate Brights palette. Going into that on a Coastal Scents Pro Fluff blending brush. And so this is going into the crease and being brought down into the outer corner a little. And I'm just gonna run back over those edges with the shade Pop Rocks. Now I'm going into my dupe for Cola, which is the shade Karaoke from the Party Animal Laura Lee Los Angeles palette, using the fluffy end of a brush that comes with Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes. And this is going in the outer corner on the lid and a little bit into the crease, sort of going all the way like towards the middle of the eye, maybe a little further past. This is sort of acting as like a definer shade. Traffic is rude. Now I'm going into my dupe for Cape Cod, the metallic aqua shade, and that is the shade Ultimate from the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival. So I'm going into that first on a BH Cosmetics Studio Pro number 7. It's your typical flat shader brush. And I am going to wet this first. I don't want this to be a cut crease, I just want like a little bit of control over where this is going. And once I sort of have that general placement down, I'm just taking my finger, swiping that shade on. So James said that that glitter shade Artistry was mostly meant to be used as an eyeshadow topper, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to use this purple glitter from the Pop Beauty Blink Brilliance palette, and I'm just taking this on my finger as well, like that. And I'm just going to sort of stamp this onto the middle of my lid over top of the blue eyeshadow that's already there. So for the sake of saving time, I'm going to do liner, lashes, and my face makeup off camera before we go ahead and do the rest of the lower eye. I am using these lashes. They're like this fluffy, cute winged-ish lash. I get them on Amazon, so I'll link them down below. And I'll be using Physicians Formula Eye Booster, and everything on my face will be linked down below as well. So I will be right back. Alright, so to finish off this look, I will be going into my dupe for the shade Daddy, and that is the Coastal Scents Single in Pinehurst. So I'm going into that on a BH Cosmetics Studio Pro 11. So I'm lining the outer half of my eye, under eye, doing back and forth motions so that it blends as it goes along. And now I'm going into my dupe for Social Blade, which is this shade Smash from the Pinky Rose Bright Lights palette. I'm going to do that on an AOA Studio E134. So this is a very pointed pencil brush, and I'm bringing that all the way along the inner portion of my under eye. And I'm blending it over top of that darker green. I'm going into my dupe for Hello. So this is the shade Snuzzle from my My Little Pony and ColourPop palette. So I'm gonna wet this one. There's no mirror. And I'm just tapping that with my finger. So I threw on some bottom mascara and just a sheer lip gloss. I think we got enough color going on the eyelids. And that concludes not only the tutorial portion of this video, but the entire video. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. It was a lot of work, but I really enjoyed making this. It was something very different from what I normally do. If you did enjoy this video, leave me an emoji down below. That's the color of the color that you're most excited about in this palette. Did that make sense? Yeah, that makes sense. Leave me an emoji that's the color of the color you're most excited about, and you can let me know the shade name too as well. I'm really interested to hear your guys' thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and give this a thumbs up, and hopefully I will see you guys on Wednesday.